I want to talk to you about S corporation taxes, no income. So the question is, should you file at all if you have an S corporation and you have actually generated no revenue for this year? So let's talk about that. Here's an overview I want you to pay attention to. So when we talk about filing taxes for S corporation with no income, it's very important to understand that you have to actually go with the one form only, 1120S. So the form is 1120S, and so the question is, this is on the form. This is the form on which you actually usually report your income, your losses and deductions, and related to the business. Now, the question is that while an individual who has no income might not have to file a return, a corporation seeking to make a profit must file a return regardless of whether or not it saw a profit, right? So the whole thing is, when you have an S corporation, you have the intent to produce revenue. So whether you actually achieve that goal is another thing, but you always have to file taxes, okay? So the short answer to the question is, should you file? Yes, you should always file. Now, why file if the S corporation had no income? Let's talk about that. Now, this requirement applies to traditional corporations as well as subchapter S companies. Ignoring this directive can actually result in penalties for not filing a return, even if the company had no transactions. The reason the return is required is to determine how much tax is owed and to make sure the IRS gets all the tax dollars due in the first place. This is really important. So when we analyze an S corporation, in the first year of operation, the S corporation files the Form 1120S and indicates that it will serve as the company's initial return. So when a company contracts with someone to complete a task or provide a service, the company files a Form 1099 to tell the IRS that the provider received income, right? However, companies usually don't have to provide a Form 1099 to a corporation. So if the S corporation doesn't file a tax return that shows it received zero income for a given year, the IRS has no way of finding out that information. Therefore, when an S corporation doesn't file, the IRS makes assumption about taxes owed and sends a bill for that amount. So the IRS does not assume that the business has no income. They have no idea. So even though an S corporation does not pay income taxes, it still must file Form 1120S to create a record of profits and losses. 1120S is basically an information return. So while filing a tax return in a year with no income may seem pointless, it may still be in your company's best interest, even if the law doesn't require it. Okay. Why? Because it establishes a consistent paper trail with the IRS, which is especially important for a new company. You got to have that. It really avoids extra scrutiny and audits, which are more likely if your filing pattern is inconsistent. It really creates a record of profits and losses. Shareholders are responsible as individuals for the taxes on the profits they receive, but they can also write off any losses. So this is really cool. By the way, boss, welcome back to the show. It's really a pleasure to have you here. Make yourself comfortable. You are going to enjoy today's conversation. Now, let's talk about the process of filing. So when a corporation is initially formed, it is assumed by default to be a C corporation, which falls under subchapter C of the IRC, Internal Revenue Code, right? A C corporation must file a tax return using Form 1120, not 1120S, but 1120, and pay taxes on its profits. This is true whether or not the company earned any money for shareholders during that year. So if there are no transactions to include on the return, the Form 1120 just contains zeros and the identifying information of the business, including the name and employer identification number, the EIN. The EIN is basically the company's social security number, if you will. And so partnerships and limited liability companies who choose to be taxed as corporations must also file Form 1120. So the only exceptions to the rule are exempt organizations under Section 501 of the Internal Revenue Code. So 501c3, for instance, those nonprofits. And so those are typically charities and other forms of nonprofits. And even if those companies must file by the way, must file a return if they have certain types of income. So when a C corporation chooses to change to an S corporation, it files 2553 to elect a new status, and it really becomes subject to the requirement to file an annual tax return. So S corporations are often small businesses that want to take, let's say they want to take advantage of the limited liability of an S corporation while avoiding double taxation of a C corporation. So in the U.S., like this year, approximately 5 to 6 million businesses were operating under this corporate form, Okay, and this is up from 3 to 4 million like 10 years earlier. So you can see that that's really more than double the number of C Corps for the same period of time. What I want to say is that if the corporation is established or if it changes to an S corporation form of operation in the second, third, or fourth quarter of the year, using a fiscal year not based on the standard calendar year may be an option. For example, let's say you set up your company in July and immediately move to treat it as an S corporation. However, due to other commitments, you don't start operating until April of the next year. So you could file an initial return that includes the period from formation in July to the start of operations in April, plus the 12 months following the beginning of operations. So going forward, your fiscal year will be April 1st through March 31st, but your initial return will cover the entire period of the company's existence. By the way, boss, I want to quickly just remind you of today's topic. We are having a conversation about S Corp taxes, no income. Now, here is the approach I really want you to pay attention to. So when we talk about filing taxes for a small business and S corporation with no income, to file or not to file, as I think I've already established that you should really file, okay? And it's one of those things where, I mean, we've got questions from viewers who are asking us whether or not it was worth it because it was costly to file because they're not producing anything. There are no transactions on the accounts and anything. Well, the thing is that there are reasons why you might not have income in a fiscal year, because not all S corporations without income during a year are on their way to closing up shop. There are a number of reasons why an S corporation might not incur income during a fiscal year. Okay, for example, situation one: the go-getter that forms a business but waits to start operating. Some business owners put in the work to form and structure a business a year or more before operations begin. Does this sound like you? If you form your business, let's say your S corporation, and file the paperwork with the states, for example, S corporation or LLC or C corporation, but wait to officially start, you may not have income during the year, right? It is what it is. I mean, if you're not operating, you're not generating income. So this is the first scenario here. The second scenario here is that the entrepreneur who starts multiple companies then pauses one. So basically, if this sounds like you probably have 3 or 4 or 5 companies, and you have one S corporation, 2 LLCs, 2 C corporations. You're so busy that you just did not get a chance to start the S corporation. So your brick and mortar business is going great. So you decide to open a new separate online business. Unfortunately, your marketing efforts fall flat, so it doesn't do very well, right? So you lose interest and put a brief hiatus on the whole S corporation thing. And so you're hoping to get back to it eventually. You know, weeks turn into months, and before you know it, you've gone a fiscal year without incurring income, right? So it's all about, okay, you know, we're just going to put everything in limbo, but that limbo becomes like a very long limbo. So it's one of those things where you have situations again where basically an S corporation produces no revenue because, you know, of quote unquote life. Another situation that could really happen is that you are the seasonal business owner that deals with pandemics or natural disasters or what have you. I mean, you run a seasonal business, you're gearing up, ready to open shop for the season, and then boom, right? A natural disaster, pandemic, you know, people are coughing, whatever. I mean, a lot of stuff hits and you are forced to stay closed for the season. Which means what? You will not be able to open shop until the following fiscal year. Because when we talk about seasonality, it's one of those things where you know that, if your business is actually tied to cyclicality or seasonality, if you miss the boat this year, you just have to wait next year. So because of that, you can have an entire year where your S corporation produces no revenue. And so basically there's nothing to file, by the way. I mean, we're talking about not just losses, but no revenue, no transactions at all. Another scenario that we have seen in our research is that, you know, you have a business, an S corporation that's at the end of its journey, but is not officially closed yet. So let's say you basically You started your S corporation a few years ago. You were all gung ho. You were all optimistic, and stuff happens, and you lost interest, or because you were economically sort of like depleted. You kind of lost a lot of cash, and you don't have the resources to actually revamp or reboost the business anymore. So because of that, the S corporation is actually lingering there. It's just lethargic, and you have no interest in reviving it. But yeah, so some businesses begin the process of closing, but the business owner doesn't get around to cutting the final cord. So operations wind down and the business closes, but not officially, right? So if this sounds like you might have a fiscal year or 2 or 3 where your business, in this case your S corporation, has no income. So it's one of those things where you got to ask yourself, are you still in the game? Are you still interested at all? And should you actually accelerate the whole process of closing down the business and just moving on to something else, as opposed to actually dragging things on and on and on and on. By the way, boss, I want to quickly remind you of today's topic. We are having a conversation about the S corporation taxes, no income. Let me give you a few pro tips here. So what about expenses? Because when we talk about S corporation taxes, no income, of course, we got to talk about S corporation expenses also. So regardless of your situation for not incurring revenue, you fall into one of the following categories. So no business expenses and no income. So no business expenses and no income. But then you have business expenses but no income. So the category you fall into might influence whether you need to file a tax return with the IRS, depending on your business structure. And in this case, your S corporation, right? So keep in mind that when you think about, let's talk about filing taxes for S corporation with no income. And so it's one of those things where you have to understand, did you actually convert to an S corporation during the year? In other words, were you a sole proprietorship at the beginning of the year? Were you a partnership? Were you a C corporation? Were you an LLC? Like partially during the year, or did you start the year and end the year as an S corporation? This will have an impact on what kind of taxes you need to file as well. But what I want to say here is that when we talk about the S corporation, if you're a sole proprietorship, no income, no expense, you have to file Schedule C. That's generally not necessary. So if there are no income and no expenses, yeah, Schedule C, not necessary. If you have no income but expenses, filing Schedule C can help you receive a refund or credit. That's if you started the year as a sole proprietorship. If you started the year as a partnership and ended it as an S corporation, no income, no expenses, filing Form 1065 generally is not necessary. No income but expenses, filing Form 1065 is necessary. So it's one of those things where you have to really see what kind of status you started in. One thing I want to say here is that if you just started the year as an S corporation, if you have no income, no expenses, or no income but expenses, you still have to file Form 1120S. What I'm trying to say is, under all scenarios, you have to file Form 1120S. Now, even if you have to put zeros and zeros and zeros on the form, it's better to do it that way, because you are sending information to the IRS about your operations, telling the government what's really happening. As I said earlier, you're trying to establish a paper trail that's going to be very, very positive for you in the future. And it's one of those things where you have to be in a situation where you're constantly informing the authorities about what's happening. I'm not even talking about the fact that you have to inform also state tax authorities, because whenever you file your Form 1120S, you still need to send info to state tax authorities. There are some states where they have different taxes. Tax patterns for S corporations. So it's one of those things you have to be sure that you are actually compliant with those laws also at the state level. Now let's talk about, if you started the year as a corporation, as a C corporation, and then converted into an S corporation, what will happen? Well, basically the thing is that a corporation is a business structure that is a separate legal entity from its owners, right? And corporation owners must file Form 1120, U.S. Corporation Income Tax Return. So corporations, basically, if you have no income, no expenses, filing Form 1120 is necessary. If you have no income but expenses, filing Form 1120 is also necessary. So in any way, shape, or form, when you have a C corporation or S corporation, regardless of the situation, you gotta file Form 1120 or 1120S, depending upon the structure of the company. Okay, always important. You gotta file taxes. What about if you started as an LLC and then you converted into an S corporation? What's the situation calling for here? Well, the thing is that if you have, let's say, if you started as an LLC and you have no income, no expenses, you still have to file Form 1065. Okay, and basically, but it really depends if you started as an LLC and then later on you actually converted to an S corporation, or you remain LLC and then you did the change after the end of the fiscal year. Well, either way, when you have an LLC and you actually converted to a S corporation status, you have to actually file Form 1120S. Always. The bottom line here is, if there's a takeaway that I want you to really have from this show, is that when you have S corporation taxes with no income, whether you have expenses or not, you always have to file Form 1120S. Okay, even if it just means, as I just said earlier, it means that you have to put zeros, a series of zeros on the form. And what I want to say also is that filing taxes is also good, not just in terms of helping you comply with the law, but you also want to actually you never know it. Sometimes when you actually seek business credit, they ask for your annual tax return, like for the business tax returns. The lender wants to see that you have filed taxes for the last maybe 2 or 3 years. And in some cases, some banks also want to make sure that you have complied with the law. And there are some state tax authorities, state formation corporate authorities, they actually want to see that you have filed your taxes before actually giving you a certificate of good standing. So it's really good to file taxes. Always good. Let me give you a bonus before closing to this conversation. See, the whole thing is, do chapter sub S corporations file personal tax returns? Let's talk about that. See, the whole thing here is that when we talk about S corporation taxes, no income, the 1120S that I'm just talking to you about, you filed that form 1120S with the IRS, but this is a form on which you don't pay taxes. So when you think about an S corporation, I want you to think about a pass-through entity. So basically, you are not paying taxes at the business level. You are paying taxes on your personal tax returns. When you file your form 1040, you have to actually transfer Schedule K1 data onto your form 1040, and then you file your taxes personally. So it's really important to understand that when we talk about S corporation taxes, no income, you're not really paying any income anyway at the company level, but you still have to file Form 1120S because this is an information return. This is an information return that tells the IRS what's really happening with your business, and the IRS needs to have a clear idea what your business is all about and what's really happening in terms of transactions, but also the third parties, the people you're hiring, the third parties you're transacting with, the organization that you're doing business with. Okay. So a lot of people believe that when you file taxes, you're just sending the IRS information about your own situation. Yes, you do, but you also give the IRS other information about all the other parties that you actually transact with. So it's really important to keep the government informed, and that's part of your taxpayers' responsibility. Okay. And one thing I also want to say before closing to this conversation is that when we talk about S corporation taxes, no income, you remember that you still have to pay taxes, personal income taxes on any revenue that you generated. So if your S corporation hasn't produced any revenue, okay, but you as a person, you probably have made some money on the side or whatever at a regular job or in your other businesses. So you have to pay taxes on that income. And when we talk about paying taxes on that income, we're also talking about self-employment taxes. So, the whole FICO and Medicare, 15.3%, you still have to pay that because it's one of those things where you are not, especially if you're working for yourself, if you're not really working for a company, then you are responsible for all the self-employment taxes. Okay. Really important. Thank you so much for your attention. I really appreciate it. In today's conversation, I'll just talk to you about S corporation taxes, no income. So let me do a recap of the structure of today's talk. So I give you the overview, the approach, the pro tips, the bonus, and now the recap. Thank you so much. God bless you. I'll see you next time. Until then, remember, stay marvelous.